All right, we're set with that. Okay, so welcome back to the Heads and Sales podcast. It's been a little bit since I've done an episode, but I'm really excited to have Coach Drew Gibbs on, who's the head football coach at Ramapo High School since 2001. He's also a 7-time state champion. He's been inducted into the New Jersey Coaches Association Hall of Fame in 2014, and most recently he's won back-to-back undefeated state titles in 2018 and 2019. And last year I came across an article in the Washington Post about Coach Gibbs and his team and how they didn't tackle all season in practice, and they ended up winning an undefeated state championship. And obviously since that article, you've done it again. So this podcast is obviously focused around sports health and safety, and the less you tackle, I guess, the less chance there is to get hurt in a lot of ways. So I think it's really, tremendous that you're able to have such success and kind of go against the grain and what is thought of as normal and the way to do things, and to still be as successful. So Coach Gibbs, extremely honored to have you on the podcast. And I guess let's start off by, talking about what influenced your decision to decide not to tackle at practice anymore.
Right. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is it really doesn't go against conventional wisdom anymore. I think, one of the things about the coaching profession is, all of our coaches, or many of our coaches throughout the state of New Jersey and throughout the country, have adopted the model of player safety. And I think that's the number one issue here is, coaches have realized a couple things. Obviously, we're in charge of taking care of these young men. We want them to compete. We want them to get all the benefits of the game, but obviously we don't want them to end up crippled or, having repercussions later in life from playing the game of football. So, that's the one area. And I think teams, as you pointed out, have found you can be successful without as much contact during the week. Exposing your best players to less injury means there's going to be a better chance that they'll be on the field come Friday night.
Your best availability or your best ability is availability in a lot of cases. I grew up in the era of Oklahoma drill, nutcracker, all those kind of drills. So I can't picture football practice like without tackling. And I know that the state of New Jersey recently implemented the 15 minutes of tackling or contact rule at practice, but it seemed like you were ahead of the curve. So like before others adopted it or before it was even mandated by the state, it seemed like you were already kind of doing that based off of what I've been reading. So I guess that's why I was asking. I know you're highlighting what other coaches are doing and very forward thinking as well, but I was like, was there an instance that made you say like, all right, we need to keep these guys on the field and like, let's limit what we're doing at practice?
Well, it was an evolution. And, you said you grew up in the age of the nutcracker drill. I fell in love with football in the 1970s as a 10-year-old boy watching, the Steel Curtain defense and the Oakland Raiders. And football was a very, very physical game. As a player, both at the youth level, the high school and the college level, I took some hits I wouldn't want my son to take, and I gave some hits I wouldn't want my son to take. It, the game in the 70s and 80s was very physical and very brutal. I had a chance in my first coaching experience to coach with Chuck Johnson over at Ridgewood High School, and Chuck is a tremendously successful high school coach. And I learned a lot about teaching the skills of the game, teaching tackling without having to do a nutcracker drill, teaching the skill of the techniques that you need in football to be successful. If you take two little kids and you line them up 10 yards away and you tell them to run at each other, well, the naturally bigger or stronger or tougher kid at that time is probably going to win that battle. But you really haven't taught the player the technique needed to get a man to the ground or to defeat a man in a one-on-one blocking situation. So I was fortunate to be associated with a great teacher early in my football career. And then as the head coach at Ramapo, I think we did maintain physical toughness during games and in practice. We've always been very successful. But as the concussion issue started to come to the forefront, became more and more aware of, the idea that, hey, we can do more to keep our players safe. And, I think coaches, again, have done a tremendous job in modifying the rules of the game to enhance player safety, modifying the techniques we teach to enhance player safety, and how we go about practicing. Those are the three ways that we've taken that game that was very brutal and very physical in the 70s, kept, in my opinion, the great things about the game, the teamwork, the toughness, the one-on-one battles within the team concept that have to be there. We've kept that, but we've made this game much, much safer than it used to be for our players.
No, that's really cool to hear that evolution, and that, you've been coaching for a long time and you've lived through that evolution, and for you to kind of, lead the way, it's really a great thing. So you kind of said, like, practice looks different. So I was wondering if you can describe for the audience, like, well, what does practice without tackling look like, that you still instill those skill sets so that on Friday night or Saturday, these kids are, tackling effectively?
Well, first of all, breaking the tackle down, and a couple of associations have done a great job of this. It kind of came in as the hawk tackle through rugby and through the Seattle Seahawks, using that specific, low shoulder tackle was a big part of it. USA Football has jumped on board with a lot of great resources for coaches to teach tackling. So it's really in how you drill the tackle and putting the kids in the position to make a solid tackle without it having to be live contact. And you can add speed to the drill, but we are not finishing players to the ground. In practice at Ramapo, we do a circuit of tackling stations. Some of them involve, tracking the ball carrier, which is an important part of being in the right position to make a tackle. Tracking is huge. Some of it, is just getting in the proper position, that hitting position where your hips are low, your head is up. Some of the drills, we will actually go ahead and tackle somebody, but we're landing on a crash pad, a 12-inch crash mat. So there's contact from player to player, but the landing on the ground isn't going to shock that body every time you do it. And I think one of the keys to becoming a proficient tackler is getting a tremendous amount of reps. But if you're tackling kids to the ground 100 times, well, that tackling dummy is going to get banged up. He's going to get injured. So that's kind of how we've structured our drill stations for the actual teaching of tackling, by breaking the skill down into its basics, by finding good drills that simulate what's going to happen on the field, and putting them in those drills as many times as possible, just without that hard finish to the ground. And I think that's where practice has become different. When you get to the team defensive situation, everything about team defense is the same as it used to be. But again, instead of finishing a ball carrier to the ground, we're tagging that ball carrier off on the hip. We're asking our player to be in a great body position, perfect spot to make the tackle. Just pull off for the big contact, save that for Friday night.
Right. No, that all sounds great. And I think in your Washington Post article, you mentioned Chris Hogan played for you, and yes, you referenced a tackle that he made, which was, when we were tracking ball carriers when I was playing, it was always get your head in front of the ball carrier, bite the ball. And in a lot of ways, like, you put your head right in the line of fire when you do that. And although I believe it's like an effective way to get the ball carrier to the ground and not lose the tackle, I mean, can you play the next play is really like what it comes down to.
Right. And it was, it was a situation that stuck with me. Our crosstown rival, Wayne Hills, that's a huge game up here in North Jersey. And, we were beating them by 19 points at the half. It was a great ball game, back and forth, but we were up. And then early in the second half, Chris did exactly what we coached him to do at the time, which was, get your head across on a tackle. Unfortunately, it was a diving situation, and the player's knee hit him in the head and, gave him a concussion. And we had to pull him out of the game. And we went from having the advantage at each position that day to now being at a disadvantage, and ended up losing the ball game that night. And it was just one that stuck with me. So when I first heard about this hawk tackling technique of, having the head behind as opposed to in front, that was kind of where a light went off for me. And there's another organization that I think was also helped me in kind of developing the way we do things. And that is an organization called Practice Like the Pros. And if you go to an NFL practice, you'll see very little tackling to the ground, drills, teaching technique. But the New York Giants aren't going to tackle Daniel Jones or Saquon Barkley to the ground a number of times, during the season to get ready to play. That's not a wise thing to do. So a gentleman by the name of Terry O'Neill, who's the guy who spearheaded Practice Like the Pros, he came and spoke at a number of our state coaches clinics and spoke to our state association and, encouraged us to adopt this model. And it's, again, for us, it's been very successful.
I actually met Terry randomly. He sent me a random email because of the podcast, and we met at some diner in Connecticut and talked about Practice Like the Pros, and he connected me with a bunch of athletes who have gotten hurt with concussions and actually had the same injury as me. So it's interesting. It's funny that you mentioned him.
Terry shows in one of his presentations, he shows a video in a scrimmage where the quarterback got thrown down to the ground late, separated his shoulder in a situation where it didn't need to happen. And beyond the tackling, what Terry's influence has been with this Practice Like the Pros is, again, everything we do in practice, we want to compete, we want to go hard, but we want to keep our teammates safe. And that's the key. If you can learn, one of the things, if you come to a Ramapo practice, you'll hear stay off the ground, stay off the ground. If I have an offensive lineman who's physically dominating the scout player on the other side of the ball, well, in a game, we may finish that that block by dumping the guy to the ground. We're not going to do that in practice. We're going to keep him up, because if I take a player that I'm physically better than and I throw him on one of my other teammates, now I've got two guys that get hurt. The guy whose leg he falls on and the guy I finished. So a lot of it has to do with how you approach practice, and again, being able to flip the switch come game day.
Right. And I was a student manager at Rutgers football from 2009 to 2012. And that was something I heard all the time, to stay off the ground. Yep. Coach Gianna was always screaming that. And if you ended up on the ground, you had an earful just for that reason. So it's interesting. So how much of your recent success do you attribute to this emphasis on player safety and, keeping those players available to play on Friday nights?
Well, high school football now here in North Jersey, and we've added a game. So our guys play 13 regular season games. Pre-coronavirus, we would have 3 pretty competitive scrimmages. That's 16 times we were lining up against another opponent. The NFL football that I started watching in the 70s had a 12-game regular season. So our kids are playing a lot of football. Our kids, just from that schedule, are beat up, championship week. We got a lot of bumps and bruises during the playoffs. So in my opinion, the fact that we've saved them from, 50 or 60 ground collisions during practice during the year, that might be the difference between the fact that they may be sore and banged up, but they're able to play in week 13, or them not being on the field. We've been fortunate to have very few, injuries in practice that have kept players out of competing on Friday nights. So I think again, it's the right thing to do, because it's the right thing for the young people that are working for us and working with us, but it's also the right thing to do from a wins and losses standpoint.
Right. And I mean, I just think back to my own experience. It's almost like the accumulation of injuries as you go along the season. Cause when I think back to my head injury, it wasn't just getting hit in the head. I had a separated shoulder in week 2, was, obviously didn't want to hit with that. So I started hit with my other shoulder, hurt that one. And then all I had left to hit with was my head. So the sequence of events actually makes pretty good sense, but obviously it ended my season. And my career. So, the less you can get hit, the better. All right. So I know back when I played, making a tackle, wasn't just about getting a guy on the ground always. There was that, let him make him remember you or something like that next time he touches the ball. How much is that a part of the game today? Has the conversation changed, and are on Friday nights, are kids thinking that way anymore, or how is that?
I think our kids are still excited to play tough physical football. There's some players that can dominate a tackle based on their physical attributes, their strength, their natural inclination to develop power. There's some kids, hey, we have defensive players that they get you on the ground, they've done their job. So I don't think we've lost the physicality of the game or the enthusiasm for the big hit. But I think we save it up for Friday night, and that's kind of how we preach it to our players. Listen, we're staying off the ground during the week so that we can bring it with great intensity on a Friday night. So if you're old school, you might say the game is not as physical as it's been, but I still think it's pretty physical, and I think it's going to be around a long time the way we're playing it now, where if we didn't adapt the game of football, I think we're in danger of losing it, or we're in danger of not having the same participation numbers. And now you have so many kids missing out on the experience that I think is a great experience, greatest experience a young man can have is being a member of a football team. So I think you have to weigh those two attributes, and I'd much rather have more kids playing, and maybe we've taken a little of the physicality out, or I think we've just taken the injuries out. I don't really believe we've taken the physicality out, but we've tried to minimize those injury-causing situations as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't trade my football experience for the world. I loved every second of it. And have you seen a decline in participation in Franklin Lakes at all, or in your town?
We have over 100 football players in our high school program this year, which is the most that we've had in my 20 years. And again, participation often follows success. We've been fortunate enough to be very successful recently, but yeah, I think kids are excited about playing football. I think there was that concussion scare a few years ago that really became very prominent. But again, a lot of that research that they did was based on a different game. Today's game, I think, from an equipment standpoint, from a rules standpoint, from a teaching standpoint, and a practice organization standpoint, is just so much safer than it was years ago.
Right. Yeah, that's great to hear. Because I like you said, it's a shame that kids wouldn't get the opportunity to play such a great sport, because their parents are nervous about them playing or whatever. So you kind of alluded to this before too. Like, you got all sorts of different players on the field, different physicalities, different mentalities, personalities. You got all that stuff going on. Is there a particular type of player that you have to keep an extra eye on to save them from themselves?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you got to make sure they use good technique. And, fortunately, we are in an outstanding community here in our, we run clinics for our youth football coaches. Our youth football coaches do a great job of teaching the fundamentals. So, I don't have to worry about that young man who just wants to run in there with his head, because that was okay when he was, that was a habit he developed as a young player. For the most part, our kids come to us with some good skills or no skills at all, and we can teach them, fresh. But there's certain players you got to pull back in practice, and, hey, guys that really love that physical part of the game, I may have to take that player aside and have that talk with them. I said, listen, if you're up against, I think one of the biggest issues is mismatches in practice. If I've got two players of equal size, equal strength, they're going to they may have a collision. They may have a physical confrontation on the line of scrimmage. That's a good, probably nobody's getting hurt. That's a good competition. It's when and it happens in high school football because you have all different kinds of levels of experiences, when you have those mismatches. And how do you teach that big physical kid when there's a mismatch there? You need to pull up. You don't need to smash that guy on your own team. So that's part of the educational process I go through as a head coach, is getting our players to understand that, it's about practicing as fast as you can. And we pull up just short of full contact when there's a mismatch there. And I think that's part of our job as educators, is to get our kids understanding the purpose of practice.
Okay, great. And I was thinking, I heard you say that, part of making sure that you don't have that kid that you need to worry about that's always sticking his face into everything, is part of it is starting them young and starting them with the right techniques and fundamentals young. So not too long ago, I remember my coach asking me, I think our participation rates are much lower in football in the town that I grew up in. And I think it's something that my coach is struggling with to try to, combat. And, there's a lot out there about, flag football, extending flag football until 8th grade or whatever. And in my mind, it's like, all right, well, if they're playing flag football, then they're probably not playing soccer. So like when they get to 8th grade, they don't have the soccer skills to be like, oh, when I'm in high school, I'm going to play soccer. Like they have the football skills. So like they'll probably play football, even though it's not flag. But from what you're saying, that might not be the most effective way to approach it, if I'm reading that correctly. I guess, like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, listen, we're fortunate at our school. We have a lot of great athletes. We have a championship level soccer team and a championship level football team. And, kids are going to pick what they pick. As young people, I like flag football. I think anytime we can get kids involved in the game of football, I think it's a great game. I think flag is a great place to start. I watched I played as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, but then I go out and I watch some of the 8 and 9-year-olds out there on the field, and their necks are barely strong enough to hold their head up with a helmet on, some of them. And so I'm not against flag at all. I think it's a great transition to tackle football. I know some parents, choose to hold their son out till 7th or 8th grade. I probably, I would like to see kids involved in the 7th and 8th grade level. I don't think there's anything wrong with youth football, at the 3rd through 6th level when it's taught well. And again, we're in a community where it is taught very well. So as long as they're playing one or the other, or playing soccer, if that's what they, want to do, hey, as long as they're active and getting out there, I'm happy with that.
Cool. So in your years of experience, what do you usually chalk injuries up to? Is it like a lack of preparation, a lack of technique, bad luck, a lack of anything? I guess, like, what's been the pattern?
Yes.
Okay, all of it.
The question is yes, all of the above. I one of the fellows on our coaching staff coaches our D-backs and wide receivers. He was a running back for us back in 2001. And he had he tore his ACL in a non-foot on the ground injury, the strangest injury I've ever seen, where a player fell on top of him and twisted his leg in a way that it tore his ACL. So that was a bizarre injury. We had some situations, earlier in my career where there were mismatches where, maybe a bigger, more physical kid, hit a smaller kid harder than he really needed to do. And, that certainly opened my eyes that, hey, I need to do a better job of educating my players so that doesn't happen again. I had an injury in a tackling drill where, a guy back when we were finishing tackles to the ground, and, the worst situation to be in a one-on-one drill is, I've got to get you on the ground. I'm there all by myself. Well, that's really not real football. Real football, I may make the initial hit, but I've got 5 teammates there before another second usually passes by, and it's kind of a group effort. But now I have a player, who has to try to get one guy down to the ground, and we've seen an injury happen in those situations. So I think a lot of it's bad luck. A lot of it's how we teach our team, and my responsibility, again, as the head coach, to emphasize that the idea of a great practice is to be fast, to be physical, and to get off the field with everybody healthy. Emphasizing staying on our feet, emphasizing great body position, all the things that we need to do, emphasizing that, hey, he's my teammate. I'm not going to tee off on him if he's in a vulnerable position. Those types of things. Those are things that I can do to prevent injuries in practice. The game is the game. Injuries happen. We had, in the last 2 years, we've had 2 injuries where, our players have been injured by players from another team not playing by the rules, not following the rules of the game. And whether there's a penalty flag or not, that caused our players to be injured, so whether we get the 15-yard penalty or not, my player is still hurt. That kid, that's tough on that player. So, I think all of us as coaches need to do a great job with the rules and with player safety, not only in our own practices, but in games as well. We've eliminated the blind side hit from football. One player's running, looking at the ball, a blocker comes up and, the guy doesn't see him and, the guy puts a shoulder into him, that's a concussion waiting to happen. That's a serious injury waiting to happen. Guy blocks below the waist, on a pursuit play, that's an injury waiting to happen. So I think all of us as coaches have a responsibility to teach the rules of the game. And it's an awful lot of rules to the game for a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid to learn and memorize and understand. There's a lot to it when you really go out and plan it as a coach. You got a big responsibility.
Yeah, and when I think about it too, it's like when you call out that behavior that induces those injuries, like you were talking about with like not following the rules, like you got to make that kid know, like, that's not cool, man. And like, even if it's teammates, if it's a cultural thing, and now his teammates are like, like, why'd you do that? Like we don't, like, that's not how we play. You always have those outliers, I guess, but in the heat of the moment. But, obviously if you build a culture like it sounds like you're building, everyone's kind of holding each other accountable to play by the rules to make sure that, we're not going to do it to you. You don't do it to us, Hey,
it's, we're competitors when the whistle blows, but we're all part of the football fraternity. We've all, we all play this game. We all want to compete. But yeah, we really do need to look out for each other. So that, people can go on after the game and still, be in great shape.
Yeah, I think the NFL's made great strides with that too. Is like, it's looking at it as like a brotherhood, you're on the other team, but like, we're all trying to like make a living here, and you get guys like Vontaze Burfict, who is like always the outlier doing some wild thing that, is obviously going to get someone hurt.
And I'll be honest with you again, and just, the high school coaches in New Jersey where we are, I think they do a great job. Our coaches, I think they do teach with player safety in mind, and we don't see a lot of that kind of stuff on the field. And again, as a coach, it's your responsibility to control that player and teach that player and educate him as to how the game's supposed to be played.
Right. So what's your relationship with your athletic trainer?
We have a good relationship with our trainer. I think. Our trainer understands what we do and how we do it. And, so I think there's a mutual respect. I mean, I understand what her job is. I've been now the head coach here at Ramapo for, this will be my 20th season. We've only had 3 athletic trainers. So that relationship, I think, between a high school coach and the athletic trainer is an important one. Our trainers, our trainers have always gone above and beyond in terms of taking care of our athletes and, doing things that make the program go and make the program better. And, so I think it's important that the head coach and trainer have a good relationship.
Yeah. I just know, like, when I was playing, I lived obviously living in the Nutcracker, Oklahoma drill era, just put that into context. Like all the upperclassmen were always like, oh, well, like, don't go to Miss Barba, the athletic trainer, because then you won't play. Like, right. So that was always in our heads of like, well, we just got to like keep, dragging along or licking our wounds along the way. But I just didn't know if that's changed at this point too.
We've been fortunate. I would say that all of our trainers are aggressive athletic trainers who want to get the player back on the field, who understand, that this is important to the student athletes. It's important to all the teammates, but at the same time, they understand their number one job is to protect that young man from himself. And the trainer has the bottom line, the trainer tells you, you can't play, and that's it. But, we encourage our players to see the trainer. They have to, if they're hurt, you have to go see the trainer. That's your job. We will, between the trainer and the coaching staff, we'll evaluate the injury. It's not your job to evaluate the injury. And, I've had to sit players from practice. I've had to sit players from games, players that have wanted to play. We've got to look out for the long-term health of the player. And it also just makes sense, right? Yeah. If I have a good player who's banged up, do I really want to put him back in a situation where instead of just missing this week's game, he's going to miss 2 or 3 more, or he's going to be able to play at 60% for 3 games because I rushed him back a week early? So I think we all, I think we have to make common sense decisions and know that, listen, a healthy player plays better than a player who's injured. And we have to, we have to be ready to sit our guys when they're not healthy.
Yeah, and I think communicating that to the player is also important too, because obviously, like, when you're 17, you're not thinking like 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years down the road. You're like today, Like today is the most important day of the world and of my life. So to like talk someone into that with that mindset, it's tough. But like, because they don't think like, oh, I'm playing at 60%, but like that's still good. I think I'm still out there, but they're actually doing their team a disservice by being 60%. Whereas if I sat out for a week or two, like I'll come back 100%, and then what could happen?
I will tell you this, in our program, if you are we have a depth chart on both sides of the ball. If you're a second string player, you probably get 80 to 90% of the reps that the first string guy gets during the practice week. And that's just something we believe in, is having that next group ready to go. And so I don't hesitate. If I didn't give that second group the same amount of practice time, I might be more hesitant about putting a second group player into a starting role. We don't hesitate. Get your second string ready to go so that, when you have that injury, you are confident in putting that young player on the field. That's just something we believe in.
No, it's a great point, because it even gives the player confidence that like their absence is going to be, it'll still be all right.
We love to talk about that next man up philosophy. Is it's a team, and you don't win a game based on one superstar. Teams win games, teams win championships. So we always want we always want those second and third string players to know that they've got to be ready to step up. And if we don't coach them and we don't develop them, if we just focus on those starters, well then we're not ready when we get that injury. And that's something I think our staff's done a great job with.
Right. So does your staff and like as a part of your culture, do you help these players kind of like develop identities outside of football? Because I know that's something that I really struggle with when I had my career-ending injury. And really the part of the reason why I even started this podcast in general is like, that transition when football is over, you're not a football player anymore. You're just student number X at your college, and you're trying to figure it out. So I wish that I had more of an identity outside of the sport of football going into something like that. I was just curious, like, do you encourage players to do other things outside of football, like in the off season and stuff?
It's probably an area that we could do better in. I can't say that that's been a focus of what we do with our guys. I certainly understand the issue. You're an 18-year-old and we call it, you've retired from football at 18. People who retire at age 65 have a tough mental transition to go through. Here we're asking, football players who either lose their career due to just, the games passing them by at the, or they're just finished up in high school. It can be a difficult transition. I can tell you it's not something we focused on. The one thing we ask them to do or certainly encourage them to do is, whatever their passion is outside the game is to use the lessons that you've learned in our program to be successful and to follow whatever the next chapter, whatever the next passion in your life is going to be.
Okay. So I heard you mention toughness a couple times throughout this interview, and actually it's a question that I ask every single guest that comes on my podcast is, what's your definition of toughness? Just because I know it's a definition that for me has significantly evolved over time. And I'm just curious, what your definition of toughness is and what you hope that your players, what piece of that toughness is what you hope your players take with them after they retire?
Yeah. Toughness is that we never give up in any circumstances. Toughness is you can give 100% effort over and over and over again. Tough guys are not afraid of a challenge. Tough guys, run to the challenge. So, we ask our players to be tough. To me, toughness is less physical, or it has very little to do with being physical. It's really something that's in your mind is, are you tough enough to push when your body might be telling you not to, when the circumstance is telling you not to? Are you going to continue to chase your goal or chase your dream? When you're playing in a state championship game and you're down 19 points at halftime, if you're tough, you go out and play the second half as hard as you can, and we'll see where the chips fall. Those kinds of things. If you're up against a guy who's, physically bigger and stronger than you, are you going to give in, or are you going to continue to compete for all four quarters? Those are, to me, that's what toughness is all about. It has very little to do with physicality. It's mind over matter.
No, I love that definition. And it's just like so different from what my 17-year-old definition was because it was all physical.
Yep.
And what's great about your definition is like you're actually in control of all of those things. Like it's a decision that you make to take that step into the unknown and take it aggressively. And it's empowering once you realize that like that's really what makes you tough, not the muscles on your arms or how fast you run the 40.
We had a senior cornerback who actually started as a third team player on our depth chart last year. And by the time we got to the state playoffs last year, he found himself as a starter. And, he went into some pretty tough situations. And, he was such a tough kid. He wasn't big. He wasn't that strong, but he played every play as hard as he could. And he made some tremendous plays for us down the stretch. So for that young man, think about the mental toughness it takes to go into your senior year, you're third on the depth chart. A lot of kids might walk away. There was no walk away there. He didn't walk away. He kept fighting. He kept working, and he eventually achieved his goal. And then he achieved his goal, and he found himself on the big stage with all of his teammates counting on him in a role that he'd never really been in before. And he didn't wither. He competed every play. Hey, he made some great plays. He made a few mistakes, but to me, that just showed tremendous mental toughness from that young man. That he didn't back down from any situation.
It's cool that showing that kind of toughness gives you opportunities. Like opportunities find you when you carry yourself that way, right?
Absolutely.
That's really cool. Trying to think. Oh, so we're obviously in a weird time right now with COVID, and I kind of compare what some of these athletes are going through with COVID to like almost a career-ending injury to some degree. I guess, what's the pulse coming from your players, just like with everything going on? And I think New Jersey has like a shortened season. Am I correct? Or
Yes, we're hoping for at least 8 games. Right now, it's set to be a 6-game football season and a 2-week postseason, 2-game postseason. So we're feeling pretty comfortable about that, pretty strong that that's going to happen. I know when our players got back together, this summer, we were able to start our phases on July 13th, and they were just happy to be back together. They were happy to be out, doing what they love to do. I think this pandemic has been very difficult on our young people. Our young people are, we're all social beings, and the isolation that's caused by this pandemic has been difficult. So for me, I think the return to sports has been a great thing for our young people.
Yeah, and that seems to be kind of the consensus from even doctors. I used to work for the Dr. Martins. He's the Jets internal medicine doctor, and he did a video recently that I saw talking about that exact thing. It's like the risk benefit of keeping them out versus the risk of keeping them out. Keeping them out because of COVID or keeping them out because of like their mental health. Like what's the lesser of two evils? And from what he was saying, it's like these kids' mental health are like struggling hardcore, and they're far more likely to struggle with that than ever suffer from COVID or even get COVID because they're healthy, So it's interesting you say that.
We need to get our schools open in some modified form. Obviously, again, the physical health of everybody is important, but I think our folks need to be back doing what we were meant to do. And hopefully, I think our state and hopefully other states around are going to be able to figure out a way to get our kids back in the classroom and keep them on the fields safely.
Well, Coach Gibbs, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge on the podcast. And I just want to commend you for your, tremendous leadership and the culture that it's obvious that you've created to have 100 kids in your program. Like people want to be a part of that. It's obvious. I know winning helps that, but you don't just win out of nowhere. Like you win for a reason, and it's a culture that you build over time. So I really appreciate you taking the time while you guys are preparing for this upcoming season. And you truly are a role model in my eyes to, all the other coaches out there, just to be forward thinking and to keep players safe and keep them on the field and, let them play this great game.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. It was fun. I enjoyed being with you.